Christmas party last night. So we had a good time last night. Thank the Lord for letting us have a good time. And if you have your Bible, turn to 2 Kings chapter number 20. We're going to read all three of these passages right here. We're going to read all three of them because we're going to bounce back and forth a little bit. But 2 Kings chapter number 20, we're studying Hezekiah right now. And we're going to start reading in verse number 12. It says, at that time, Baruch-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present unto Hezekiah, for he had heard that Hezekiah had been sick. And Hezekiah hearkened unto them, and showed them all the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold, and the spices and the precious ointment, and all the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house, nor in his dominion, that Hezekiah showed them not. Then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah, and said unto him, what said these men, and from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, they are come from a far country, even from Babylon. And he said, what have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, all the things that are in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. And Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day, shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away from, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Then said Hezekiah unto Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord, which thou hast spoken. And he said, is it not good? If peace and truth be in my days. I'm going to stop reading right there. Turn over to 2 Chronicles chapter number 32. And we looked at this passage last week, but 2 Chronicles chapter number 32, I'm going to reread some of what we looked at last week in verse 24. In those days, Hezekiah was sick unto death, and prayed unto the Lord, and prayed unto the Lord, and he spake unto him, and he gave him a sign. But Hezekiah rendered not again according to the benefit done unto him, for his heart was lifted up. Therefore there was wrath upon him and upon Judah and Jerusalem. Notwithstanding, Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart, both he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the wrath of the Lord came not upon them in the days of Hezekiah. And Hezekiah had exceeding much riches and honor, and he made himself treasuries for silver and for gold and for precious stones and for spices and for shields and for all manner of pleasant jewels. Storehouses also for the increase of corn and wine and oil, and stalls for all manner of beasts, and coats for flocks. Moreover, he provided him cities and possessions of flocks, and herds in abundance, for God had given him substance very much. This same Hezekiah also stopped the upper watercourse of Gihon, and brought it straight down to the west side of the city of David, and Hezekiah prospered in all his works. Verse 31, howbeit in the business of the ambassadors of the princes of Babylon, who sent unto him to inquire of the wonder that was done in the land, God left him to try him, that he might know all that was in his heart. Now we'll go back to Isaiah chapter 39, then we'll be finished right here in chapter 39. At that time, Baruch-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick and was recovered. And Hezekiah was glad of them, and showed them the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment, and all the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house, in all his dominion, that Hezekiah showed them not. Then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah, and said unto him, what said these men, and from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, they are come from a far country unto me, even from Babylon. Then said he, what have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, all that is in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. Then said Isaiah to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Then said Hezekiah to Isaiah, Good is the word of the Lord, which thou hast spoken. He said, Moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days. And so again, we're going to go. I'm going to go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 32 right here, and we're going to start right there. But I want you to notice in chapter number 32, if you remember, last week we looked at verse number 25 where it says, But Hezekiah rendered not again. We looked at that last week, how that everything that God had done for Hezekiah, everything, all the benefits that God had done in Hezekiah's life, and it was a sad day for this to have to be written down in the scriptures of everything that God had done for Hezekiah, and the Bible said that he rendered not again. He didn't return unto God what God had done to him. And his heart had gotten lifted up with pride. And he let that pride come in, and he got to looking at the I and the me instead of looking at God. And instead of saying, hey, this is what God has done for me, this is how God blessed us, he just got to talking about I and me all the time. And the Bible talks about that not only was Hezekiah that way, but the people of Judah and Jerusalem had gotten that way. Their heart had gotten lifted up. And again, if you think about it, I mean, they should have all been either dead or slaves. Now, had God just let Sennacherib do what he wanted to, they would have been slaves or dead. But God rescued them, and then we know how that Isaiah came to Hezekiah and he said, "Hey, get your house in order. You're about to die." And so surely to goodness you would have thought that Hezekiah, that he prayed and Isaiah came right back and said, all right, God's going to give you 15 more years. You would have think those last 15 years would have been the best 15 years of his life. Say, look, God, I didn't deserve anything. I should be in the grave right now. But instead of being in the grave, you've let me live, and I'm going to live every single day of these next 15 years worshiping and honoring you with my life. But that's not what he did. That's not what he did. And so you get down here to verse number 31, and we see in Chronicles how God blessed him and blessed him and blessed him in those from 27 to verse 30. God blesses him, and he gives him more stuff and more stuff and more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. And sometimes it's not a blessing to be rich. Sometimes it's not a blessing to have too much stuff. Sometimes you get to taking God for granted. Whenever you're poor and you're dependent upon God, but once you start getting something, you're like, I don't need God anymore. I don't need God anymore. I've got everything I need. I got everything I want. I've got everything supplied for me. I'm good. And it should never be that way. It's no matter how much stuff you have, no matter where you're at in your life, whether you're poor and you don't have a lot, or whether you you have been blessed and you have all kinds of stuff. It's a shame, but it's a shame. But and I don't have the statistics in front of me, but millionaires commit suicide every day. They commit suicide all the time. And you're like, and someone who's poor is like, well, I'll tell you what, if I had $1 million, I wouldn't commit suicide. You don't know that. You think that, but they have all kinds of issues too. You think, well, just if I had more money, then everything in life would be good. No. If you're not right with God, and your heart's not right with God, and your relationship's not right with God, life's not that grand. Even though you have lots of money, like, well, I can buy anything I want, it'll make me happy. Guess what? Money doesn't buy happiness. You think it does, but it doesn't. And so you get to verse number 31 right here. And he says, howbeit, in the business, so again, we're reading down through here. We've already seen where Hezekiah rendered not again, but he repented in verse number 26. We looked at that, notwithstanding Hezekiah humbled himself. He repented in verse number 36. But here we have verse number 31, and something I thought about is just because you overcome something one time in your life, it does not mean you're not going to have to overcome that again. There are certain things that you've overcome, and it's never been a problem again. There are certain things that once you get saved, sometimes God takes things away from you, and you never struggle with them again. But there are other things in your life that you will face, and you're like, I got it whipped this time. And if you don't watch, it'll creep in again, and next thing you know, you'll be fighting that same battle again and again and again and again. And as you get older, you think, well, surely to goodness I'm going to get over this, and you don't get over it. And so you have to be careful. What was Hezekiah's problem? It was pride. It was pride. And so here God said, he said, howbeit in the business of the ambassadors of the princes of Babylon, who sent unto him to inquire of the wonder that was done in the land. So what were they doing? What again, I don't necessarily think that in the beginning that the king of Babylon, and y'all noticed I read it twice and I can't say his name. But anyway, we're just going to call him King of Babylon. But anyway, I mean, I don't think necessarily, Brother Jay, that when he first sent in here, he's like, you know what? One of these days, one of my ancestors is going to take over. They're going to take over Judah and Jerusalem. I don't think that's what he intended, but God allowed them to send them into the land, and they inquired of the wonder that was done in the land. Well, what was the wonder that was done in the land? Well, again, pretty much everyone was under the reign of Sennacherib and the king of Assyria, and he was kind of just taking over lands and doing what he wanted to. And then he went up against Judah, he went up against Jerusalem, and he went up to take over Judah and Jerusalem. And next thing you know, 185,000 of his soldiers were dead, and he went home and ended up dying by the hands of his children in the house of his God. And so, maybe they came and said, hey, how did you defeat the king of Assyria? How in the world, I mean, every other country that he invaded, every other city that he invaded, every other one that he invaded, how in the world did you defeat the king of Assyria? And also the wonder that was done was, if you remember, Hezekiah was sick, and Isaiah's like, hey, God's going to give you a sign. What do you want your sign to be? Do you want the sun to go forward 10 degrees or backwards? And he said, what's the easy thing for it to go forward? I want it to go backwards. Well, guess what? The people of Babylon worship the sun. They worship the sun, and they're worshiping that sun, and they look and say, what in the world just happened right here? And they start inquiring, and they find out, wait a second, something happened over there in Judah. Something happened in Judah, and the king of Judah was sick, and because he was sick, his God said, hey, we'll give you a sign. I'll give you a sign to show you you're going to get better. And that sign was the sun's going to go back 10 degrees on the dial. And that happened, and they saw that, and again, God put it in there that they came to inquire of the wonder that was done in the land. Now, if you think about it, that's what they came to find out. We read it twice. We read it in Kings, and we read it over in Isaiah. Isaiah asked him, where did they come from and what did they say? Neither time do you see where Hezekiah told him what they said. He tells him where they came from. He tells him where they came from, but he doesn't tell him what they said. And so, but when I read this, if they come to find out about the wonder that was done in the land, Brother Jay, I mean, now was your opportunity. Now was your opportunity. We talked about this last week. Let me tell you what God did for me. Do you read anywhere in here where it shows, where he says, let me show you what God did for me? We're gonna read it again, but I mean, you're gonna read again where he keeps saying, these are my house and my treasures and my kingdom and my and mine and I. And he says it over and over and over again. They came to inquire the wonder. I don't see where he took them to the temple. I don't see where he took them to the temple. He took them everywhere else. He took them everywhere else instead of taking him down to the house of his God and say, let me show you. Y'all worship the sun. Let me show you the God who controls your God. Let me show you the God that controls your God, that can make the sun go forward or backward 10 degrees just at his word. But that's not what he did. That's not what he did. He took them and he said, let me show you my house. Let me show you the gold. Let me show you the silver. Let me show you that I built this up. Let me show you my herds. Let me show you my shields. Let me show you my. And he forgot to show him his God. He forgot to show them his God. Let me explain to you why it would never be a good idea for Babylon to attack Judah and Jerusalem, because let me explain to you about my God. We didn't have to lift a finger. Let me show you where I took those letters, and I took them down and I laid those letters on the altar, and I got down on my knees and I prayed, and God said, I'll deal with this for you. Let me show you. If you remember, Isaiah comes in and says, hey, who are these people and what they say to you? Why did he not take him to Isaiah and let's say, let me show you, y'all want to know about, y'all worship the sun, let me show you a true prophet of the true God. Let me introduce you to the man. Let me introduce you to the man that first of all told me I was going to die and I was sick. And let me also introduce you to the man that God said, hey, go back and tell him he's going to live 15 more years. And that I will give him a sign, and the sign that he said this is what God's going to do, that's what God did. But that's not what he does. That's not what he does, Chris. He says, let me show you my stuff. Let me show you my kingdom. Let me show you all this stuff, and he shows them everything but his God. He shows them everything but his God. If you see it right there, he said they came to inquire the wonder that was done in the land. And again, I read this last week. It said, God left him. God left him to try him. I mean, think about that. Again, this is the adult Sunday school class. But you think about what the next phrase is going to say. To show him what was in his heart. God left him to try him that he might know all that was in his heart. Would anyone in here like for God to leave you and try you to know what's in your heart? I was thinking about it this morning. I was around my father-in-law under his preaching for 20 some years. And you think, I heard so many messages, and if you remember, one of the things that he used to say all the time whenever a older saint of God would pass away was he would say, God, you tell him that I tried to tell him on it when he was here. God, you tell him that I tried to tell him who I was when I was here. And you think about that. What was he saying? He said, look, my father-in-law tried to be an open book. But he's like, hey, look, sometimes people look and they're like, oh, that person's so wonderful. And he's like, I tried to tell him. I know what's in my heart. And I try to keep that reined in. I don't want that ever to come out. But the Bible says here that God left him. Why? Because he felt like he was okay. He felt like, I've got this. I'm good. I've got this defeated. I've got this. I've got everything I need, everything I want, and I can handle it from here. You ever get the feeling you can do something and you're like, God, I'm good. I got this. I don't need to pray about it. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to seek counsel about it. God, I've just got this. And God's like, all right, I'll let you. And you make the biggest messes in your life. You make the biggest mistakes you make whenever you're like, God, I'm good. Here's the co-pilot seat. You sit over there, and I'll just run this one because I know what I'm doing. And you're like, no, we're in church. These are people that go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night would come to revival. That would never happen to anyone in here. Well, let me remind you who Hezekiah was. Hezekiah's first order of business when he took over his kingdom was not, hey, we're going to build my palace up. We're gonna bring in some more stuff so I have more money. We're gonna build up my flocks, my herds. We're gonna do all that. No. What happened to Hezekiah that from the time when he took over as a young man, when the first thing he wanted to do was fix that house of God up? Brother Jay, how after everything God did for him, how did he get to the point in his old age? Again, if you remember, he was raised by a heathen. He was raised by a father that worshiped under every green tree. How does a young man say, I'm not going that way, I'm going after God? But then in his older age, and again, he wasn't even that old when he died. But in his older age, how does he come to the point where here these people come and God has done all this wonder for him, and they come to inquire of the wonder that was done in the land, and he's like, let me show you some stuff. Why would it not have been the first thing he did, Brother Park, to say, let me take you down the house of God. This is where it all starts with me. This is where it all starts with me. Let me take you down there to that altar. Let me show you when I need wisdom, this is where I go. Let me take you to this man of God that whenever I don't know what's going on, he already knows. And he comes and says, hey, this is what's going to happen. And it comes to pass. That's not what he did. Why? Because God left him. God left him to try him. Again, I don't think anyone in here would raise their hand and say, you know what, pray for me this week that God leaves me to try me so that I can see what's in my heart. You don't want that to happen. Constantly you're praying, God, this is in there. I don't know why it's in there. I don't want it to be in here. I don't want it here. I don't want it in there. God, help me get rid of that. But somewhere in Hezekiah's life, he stopped praying that, Chris. Somewhere in Hezekiah's life, he stopped praying that. He's like, I'm good, God. We're good. We're pretty tight. You've done a lot for me. I know we're good. We're buddies. It's kind of funny, Brother Parks, you know what I mean? But you think about that, that's kind of how he treated that relationship. Again, it says that in verse 25, but Hezekiah rendered not again. And in verse 26, he humbled himself. But here we are in verse number 31, that here he is again. And it's the same problem. It's pride. It's the same problem. You say, I've dealt with that in my life. Guess what? There are things that you will deal with all your life. There are things you will deal with all your life. You'll deal with that thorn in the flesh like Paul had, and God's grace will be sufficient, but you'll deal with it and 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 deal with it. And if you don't deal with it, God might leave you to try you, to show you what's in your heart. Again, like I said, it was pride that came in, and God was blessing him, and it's a good thing for God to bless you. But if it's going to fill your heart with pride, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. If you think about it, when Hezekiah was basically a pauper, what did he do? Whenever Sennacherib came the first time, he emptied out his treasures. He went to the house of the Lord and pulled the gold off the thing. Guess what? He was pretty close to God that day. He's pretty close to God. He depended on God then. But now he's got everything he needs, Brother Parks. He's got everything he wants. He was basically expanding his kingdom. He's like, hey, I didn't have enough room, so I had to go make more room. I had to build more stuff. I had to do more. And in doing more, he forgot that it was God that was doing all that for him. It was God that was doing every bit of that for him. And God said, well, I hate to have to do this to him, but I'm going to have to show him. I'm going to have to show him. I'm going to have to show him. Again, you've heard it preached, and I don't remember who said it. But you heard it preached where people are like, hey, go get you a chair, sit down, and say, God, show me who you know who I am. Guess what? A lot of us aren't prepared for God to show us who He knows who we are. You're just not prepared. The heart's deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, and who can know it? You think you know how bad your heart is, but you don't know how bad it is. But God knows. And so you better constantly be in a mindset that, God, I don't ever want you to leave me. God, I don't ever want you to try me in this manner right here. God, please, I'm weak, I'm frail, and I'm fragile, and I am full of pride. I am full of this. I am full of that. And I don't even know how high the heights go or how deep the depths go that I'm full of this stuff. I may feel like because I passed one test that I can ace the ACT. Well, guess what? You just passed the kindergarten test. That doesn't make you a Rhodes Scholar. But I mean, that's what happened to Hezekiah. God is, he's went through a test, and he's went through a trial, and now God's blessing him, and now it's like, well, I'm good. I've got this. And he didn't have it. He didn't have it at all. And then let me get back to Isaiah right here, and you see right here that in verse number 2, I want to start reading again. We know that the king he sent letters and sent a present to Hezekiah. And in verse number 2 it says, Hezekiah was glad of them. And so here it is. I mean, have you ever met someone that just cannot take praise? Have you ever just met someone that it just goes to their head, Miss Jimmy? We all know people that, you just know someone and all you have to do is just, we've got a lady at work. I don't know what she's got. Like, she's got something special in her joints, Brother Croft, because she can pat herself on the back better than anyone I know. But there are some people that you just pat them on the back just a little bit, and they're just to the moon. It just goes straight to their head, and you can just blow a little bit of smoke, and they're your buddies for life. And you don't even have to mean it; you just have to say it. And look at that guy. I tell you what, that's a good guy right there. Hey, there's no difference when he was here than when he's here, but because he said a nice word right here, then he's still a good guy. No, he's still the same guy he was over there. He just said something kind to you. And so it says, and Hezekiah was glad of them. He's like, hey, look, finally someone that recognizes, someone that sees. These people came a long way. They came a long way just for me. Can you believe that? They rode all the way. They rode 30 minutes in one direction just to hear me teach Sunday school. Can you believe that? Someone come 30 minutes in one direction and going to sit here and listen to me ramble on 45 minutes to hear what I got to say like I've really got something to say. But again, like I said, sometimes it doesn't take much flattery in some people to the moon. Completely change their opinion about someone. And so he's like, he said, they came a long way. They come all the way from Babylon. Would you believe they came all the way back just to see me? Just to see little old me. And so it said, and he showed them the house of his precious things. His precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment and all the house of his armor and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house, nor in all his dominion that Hezekiah showed them not. How many hises was in that verse right there? 4, 5? Not one mention of what God did for him in that verse. Not mentioning, boys, I'm glad you came. Sit down. Let me tell you what God did for me. Boys, I'm glad you came. I know why you came. You want to hear about this. You want to hear about that. But this is my story. This is the beginning of my story. This is the middle of my story. This is the end of my story. Anything you see in this kingdom is because God put it here. Anything you see, because the reason I'm alive right now is because God let me live. The reason why this thing is not now part of the Assyrian Empire is because God kept it from being part of the Assyrian Empire. But instead, it's like, look at my stuff, look at my stuff, look at my stuff, look at my stuff, look at my stuff. In verse number 3 again, then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah and said unto him, what said these men? He doesn't answer this question. I read it in 2 Kings as well. What said these men? And from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, They are come from a far country unto me, even from Babylon. What was he hiding? Why could he not answer that question? What said they unto thee? Why could he answer that question, Brother Jay? He doesn't answer that question. He answers the second question, but not the first question. Maybe he realized. And again, every one of us has been in a situation where we've done something we're not supposed to, and the man of God either gets up and preaches or talks to us personally, and you realize he already knows. And we know that he knows, and we still, if I don't say anything, maybe he really doesn't know. Maybe it just looks like he knows. Maybe that message was actually for Frankie, and it wasn't for me because Frankie did something, but it kind of applied to me. Well, actually it did apply to me, but I'm gonna blame it on Frankie and say that message was for Frankie and it wasn't for Paul. And the whole time he knows, but you're like, well, I just won't say anything so he don't know. Was that what he was doing? I mean, what was he doing? Why would he not just say, well, this is what they came to inquire the wonder that was done in the land? Because then if he'd have said, well, they came and inquired of the wonder that was done in the land, then Isaiah would have said, well, what did you tell him? Did you tell him how God did this for you? Did you tell him how God did that for you? Did you tell him how God turned the sun back 10 degrees, as a sign just for you to show you're going to live? No, I showed him a treasure. Well, why would you show him your treasure? Again, sometimes you're wrong. You're wrong. You've done wrong. And and you're like, oh, I'm just not going to say. Because if I say this, then he's going to say this. And he's right if he says this to me, so I'm just not going to say anything and hope that he doesn't say anything back. If he said, well, they come to inquire the wonder, I say, well, did you tell them about God? Did you take them to the house of the Lord? Did you take them down there and say, hey, this is where it all starts and ends with me? You didn't come introduce them to me. I mean, I'm the prophet of the land right here. You didn't come bring them down to me and say, hey, tell me how God spoke to you. Tell me how God spoke to you and said, hey, he's going to die. Tell me how God spoke to you again and said, hey, he's not going to die. He's going to live. Tell me how God spoke to you and said, hey, offer him a sign. And then the sign that you prayed about was the sign that happened. None of that happened. So he didn't answer the question, what they say unto you. He just said, here's where they came from. And again, I said it many times. I told y'all the story over and over, and me and my sister talk about it a lot, how that my dad had GPS on Musk before even the military knew what GPS was. I mean, my dad could find me anywhere. I could walk into a town, into a gas station, and they'd say, your dad needs you to call. I didn't even tell him I was going to Kaiser. I never even told him I was going to Kaiser today. Your dad needs you to call him. And so that was back before cell phones, so most kids don't understand that nowadays. But yeah, back before cell phones, yeah, my dad had GPS tracking device on me. And so, but I learned early on that, hey, my dad already knew, so I might as well just say, yeah, all right, this is where I was, this is what I did, this is blah blah blah. But here Hezekiah is like, well, I'm just not going to say, and so Isaiah's like. He says in verse number 4, he said, then said he, what have they seen in thine house? He said, you didn't tell me, but I know. You didn't tell me you showed me their house. You just said they came from Babylon. But guess what? God told me you showed them everything. God told me you showed them everything. God told me, I asked you what they said to you, and all you said was they came from Babylon. But guess what? God told me you showed them everything. So I'm going to ask you the question. Again, a lot of times as a parent, you ask a question you already know the answer to. I already know the answer. That was when Grady was little, and he's about grown out of it now. And like, Grady, what did you do? And then he'd end up getting a spanking, Brother Tyrone, because a lot of times what he did wasn't really deserving of a spanking, but because he tried to get out of the spanking by lying, he got a spanking for lying. I'm like, Grady, you wasn't getting a spanking for what you did, but you're getting a spanking now because you lied. And I tried to teach him from a little child that, hey, look, this is what I did. This is what I did. And so he said, what have they seen in that house? And Hezekiah answered again, all that is in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. You think about a king. You think about a king. A lot of times you go to see the king. If you go to see the president, for us, you know what? The president's not going to take you all around. He's going to pawn you off on somebody else, and they're going to, here, you know what? Nice to see you. Shake your hand. Autograph something for you, and then you go on with someone else. They'll show you around. They'll show you around the White House. They'll show you around the Capitol. You're not riding around with the president, but he said, I showed them everything. Me personally, Hezekiah, I showed them. I took them around and said, look at this. This is mine. Look at this. This is mine. Look at this. This is mine. Look at all of this stuff. It's all mine. Then said Isaiah in verse number 5, Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. I'm telling you, when you're not right with God, that's not a pleasant thing to hear. When you've done something, you know you've done something wrong, and you're like, hear the word of the Lord. You're like, it's coming. I know it's coming. I know it's coming. Behold, in verse number 6, the days come that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad, Chris. You think about it. It's like, look, all that stuff you're so proud of, well, guess what? One day the Babylonians are going to come in, and they're going to take every bit of it. Every single thing that you were so proud of. Everything that you said, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. Guess what? That king of Babylon's going to come in, and he's going to take it, and God's going to let him take it. That's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. Now, think about that right there. Everything that I'm so proud of, I've done this, and I've done that, and I've done this, and I've done that. About that. Yeah, all you did, you built up a big storehouse, and someone else is going to take it. Someone else is going to take it. And then in verse number 7, and of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Now, I think we all understand what eunuchs are, but you understand, Brother Jay, I don't think it would thrill you if God said, hey, guess what? Your boy Levi, I got some bad news for you about Levi. I got some bad news for you about Levi, and any sons that Levi's going to have, I got some bad news. He's going to be a slave, and guess what? The Daniel line is going to end with Levi because Levi's not going to be able to have more children. He's going to be a slave in another land serving another king, and he's not going to be able to have children. Anyone in here want to hear that about your sons or your daughters? Then said Hezekiah to Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord. What in the world? And again, I understand. I understand. And I was reading one commentary, and he kept saying, well, Hezekiah just took his punishment. Hezekiah just took his punishment. I'm not reading it that way. Good is the word of the Lord. Why would he say good is the word of the Lord, Brother Jay? I'm sorry. But if a man of God come to me and say, I got some bad news, life's going to be pretty good for you, but I got bad news for Bub and I got bad news for Grady. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be like, well, sounds good to me. He said, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. He said, moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days. Look in verse 19 of chapter 20. Then said Hezekiah to Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. And he said, is it not good? Why would you ask a man of God? Isn't that good? Don't you think it's good? It sounds all right to me. Sounds fine to me. As long as peace and truth's in my days, I'm good with it. As long as peace and truth's in my days, then I'm kind of fine with it. I mean, that's their problem. That's their problem. Have you stopped looking out for the next generation? Have you only turned yourself to just look inward and say, as long as I'm good, I'm good. It's on them. And I understand. I know y'all know who Shaquille O'Neal is, and I read a thing somewhere where he told his kids, he said we are not millionaires. I am a millionaire. You are not a millionaire. I am a millionaire. And so I kind of get that. It's like, look, I earned my money. I've earned my money, and you're not just going to be a millionaire because I'm going to give you a ton of money. Go work for it and earn it yourself. I get that. I understand that part of the philosophy. But I don't understand what Hezekiah is saying right here. Again, I don't understand. Here's a man that when he was told, hey, set your house in order, you're going to die, what's the first thing he did? He turned his face to the wall and prayed. Why on earth did he not say, Isaiah, we're going to have to pray about this. We're going to have to pray about this. I'm going to have to talk to God. I'm going to have to confess to God that, that this is me, this is my fault. But don't punish future generations because of something that I did. We got to pray about this. We got to look into this. I mean, Isaiah, is there anything that can be done? He doesn't say that at all. He just says, well, good is the word of the Lord. Sound good to me. Peace and truth in my days. Sounds all right to me. I won't be here. So it's not my problem. I'm going to be gone anyway, and so it's not my problem. And we live in a generation, we live in a society that feels that way now. Actually, we live in a society that just don't care as long as, they're having a good time today. They don't care what happens tomorrow. And so, but you see, he's like, hey, good is the word of the Lord. And he's like, what's wrong with you? That you would be so calloused and so carnal at this stage in your life that you're like, hey, that's fine with me. My sons are going to be eunuchs? That's fine. My sons are going to be eunuchs? That's all right, that's good. They're going to be slaves in Babylon? I mean, why would he not say, how? I mean, after all God did for us to save us from the king of Assyria, now they're going to be slaves to Babylon? Babylon? Little old Babylon? Yes. But he said, is it not good? Is it not good? I mean, don't you think? What do you think Isaiah could have, what do you think? I mean, again, Isaiah is telling him this, and he's like, did he really just ask me if that was good? Did he really just ask me if I thought it was a good thing? That one day, this land right here was going to be owned by the Babylonians. Is it not a good thing that his children are going to be slaves? I don't even understand why he would ask me that question. And how many, again, how many times have you just let something in? You let something into your life you never thought would be there. And the man of God says something to you, and you don't deal with it properly. You don't deal with it properly. You're like, as long as it's not really affecting me, then I'm, Unfortunately, we're like little children. You can say no, 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 and then every once in a while you're just like, no. Whoa. And Hezekiah's like, well, God's not really slapping me down, so I'm not worried about it. And he wasn't worried about a future generation. Didn't concern him. And again, Hezekiah, the Bible calls him a good king. He did a lot of good things. But in these last 2 weeks, he rendered not again. And then we got to this passage with the Babylonians, and it says God left him. God left him to try him to show him what was in his heart. Thank you.